We came to you for life. Two Apache sisters told the Lone Rancher, Arizona Territory, winter 1881. The snow fell in thick curtains across the high desert, turning the world into a maze of white and shadow. Mason Reeves stood at his cabin window watching the storm devour the landscape. He'd built this place with his own hands 2 years ago after the army had stripped him of his rank and told him to disappear. He'd done exactly that. The knock came like a gunshot, 3 heavy strikes against weathered pine. Mason's hand found his Colt revolver before his mind fully registered the sound. No one traveled in weather like this. No one came to his door at all. He'd made certain of that, chosen this isolation deliberately 12 miles from the nearest settlement, hidden in a fold of hills where even the mail rider wouldn't venture. He moved to the door, positioned himself to the side thumb on the hammer. "Who's there?" Silence. Then a woman's voice, strained with effort but carrying unmistakable command. "Open the door." "My sister is dying." Mason hesitated. "A woman? Out here? In a blizzard?" Every instinct screamed trap, but something in that voice, not pleading, not desperate, just stating fact, made him slide the bolt. The door swung inward, and the storm pushed 2 figures into his cabin. The first woman was tall, wearing men's clothing soaked through with snow, and something darker, blood. She carried a second woman in her arms, smaller, barely conscious, and very clearly pregnant. "Close the door," the tall woman commanded, not asked. Mason did, his revolver still drawn but lowering as he took in the scene. The conscious woman, mid-20s, Apache with a scar running from chin to jawline, laid her burden on Mason's bed with surprising gentleness. In the lamplight, he could see the extent of the damage. The pregnant girl's dress was soaked with blood from a wound in her abdomen. Her skin had gone the gray-pale color that meant shock, maybe worse. How long ago was she shot? Mason asked, his cavalry training overriding his isolation instincts. 6 hours? The tall woman straightened, and Mason saw she wore a bow across her back, a hunting knife on her belt, and had the posture of someone accustomed to violence. "Maybe 7. I've kept pressure on the wound, used yarrow to slow the bleeding. It's not enough." Mason holstered his weapon and moved to the bed, examining the injury with practiced efficiency. The bullet had entered low on the right side, and from the location and the girl's pregnancy, he estimated 4 months. There was significant danger to both mother and child. "She needs a surgeon," he said flatly. "Real medicine, not field treatment. The nearest doctor is in Prescott, 40 miles. The woman's dark eyes met his without flinching. "She'll be dead in 20. So you're going to save her here? I'm not a doctor, but you were a soldier. Cavalry, judging by the way you hold yourself. You've seen field surgery." Mason turned away, moving to his small shelf of medical supplies. The woman was right. He'd assisted in enough battlefield operations to know the basics, but this was different, more complicated, higher stakes. "What's your name?" he asked, buying time to think. "Sarah Brightknife. This is my sister Hannah." She paused. "And before you ask, yes, we're running from the men who did this." Military. Sarah's jaw tightened. "Captain Richard Sullivan's company. You know the name?" Mason's hands stilled on the bottle of carbolic acid he'd been reaching for. He knew the name. Sullivan had been a lieutenant when Mason served, ambitious and cruel, the kind of officer who saw native peoples as obstacles rather than humans. The kind who'd ordered that raid on the peaceful Apache village 2 years ago. The one Mason had refused to participate in, the refusal that had ended his career. "I know him," Mason said quietly. "Then you know what he does? What he did to my village 6 months ago?" Sarah's voice remained steady, but Mason heard the rage beneath it, carefully controlled. "What his man did to Hannah." Mason looked at the unconscious girl again, understanding crystallizing. The pregnancy, the bullet wound, the desperate flight through winter storms. If you believe someone deserves a second chance no matter how they were broken, comment number 9 below. Subscribe to hear more stories where mercy matters more than judgment. "I need water boiling," Mason said, making his decision. "Clean cloth as much as you can find. And that yarrow you mentioned, do you have more?" Sarah's shoulders dropped slightly, the first sign of relief she'd shown. "In my pack." They worked in synchronized silence. Sarah proved skilled with medicinal herbs, grinding yarrow and sage into a poultice while Mason sterilized his hunting knife and the few surgical tools he possessed. As he prepared, his mind drifted to 6 months ago, to the day everything had changed. 6 months earlier, Black Mountain Apache village. Sarah had been happy then. Newly married to Kohana, a skilled hunter, who made her laugh, who understood her need to ride and fight alongside the men rather than stay with the women. She'd been 3 months pregnant, with their first child glowing with it, planning the cradle board. She would weave, imagining the stories Kohana would tell their son or daughter about the old ways, about honor and courage and living in balance. The raid came at dawn. Sullivan's company claiming to hunt renegades who'd attacked a stagecoach. But there were no renegades in their village. Only family's elders, children. Sarah's father, the peace chief who'd signed 3 treaties with the white man's government, had gone out under a white flag to explain, to offer to help find the actual raiders. They shot him in the chest without warning. The massacre that followed was efficient and thorough. Sullivan's men burned lodges, shot anyone who ran, rounded up women and girls like cattle. Kohana had fought desperately to protect Sarah, killed 2 soldiers before a third shot him in the back. Sarah watched him fall, watched the light leave his eyes as she screamed his name. They'd beaten her then, rifle butts to her stomach, until she curled around her unborn child, trying to protect what couldn't be protected. She felt something tear inside, felt warmth flood down her legs, knew with absolute certainty that her baby was dying. They'd left her in the ashes, assuming she'd die too. She didn't. She crawled to where Kohana lay, held his cooling hand, and made a promise to his spirit, and to the child they'd lost. Sullivan would pay. She would make certain of it. Hannah had been taken in that raid, loaded onto wagons with 20 other girls and women. It took Sarah 3 months to find where they were held, another week to plan the rescue, one night of careful violence to free her sister and 2 others. The others had run north toward Navajo country. Sarah had brought Hannah south toward the white man's world, where Sullivan wouldn't expect them to hide. But Sullivan had sent men anyway. And one of those men, a captain named Pike, who'd personally brutalized Hannah during her captivity, had caught up with them yesterday morning. Sarah had killed him, but not before he'd shot Hannah in the abdomen. The wound should have been fatal. Would be still, unless this former cavalry officer proved as skilled as he'd appeared. Present, Mason's cabin. I'm going to cut, Mason said, pulling Sarah back from her memories. This will hurt her even unconscious. Hold her shoulders. Hannah's eyes fluttered open as the knife bit in. She screamed, a sound that tore through the cabin, and Sarah leaned down forehead to forehead with her sister. Shh, little one. Be strong. You've survived worse. Let me die, Hannah whispered in Apache, the words barely audible. Please, sister. I don't want this. Don't want his child. Sarah's hands tightened on Hannah's shoulders. The child is yours, not his. Your blood, your body, your choice. But you must live to make that choice. I choose death. That's not a choice. That's surrender. Sarah's voice turned hard. And we don't surrender. Ever. Mason worked quickly, his hands steady despite the ethical weight of what Hannah had said. He located the bullet lodged against the abdominal wall, mercifully missing major organs. And as far as he could tell, not damaging the pregnancy. He extracted it with careful precision, dropped it into a tin cup with a wet clink, then began the painstaking process of cleaning and closing the wound. Sarah held Hannah throughout, speaking soft words in Apache, occasionally translating for Mason's benefit. When he'd finally sutured the external wound and bound it with clean cloth soaked in the herbal poultice, more than an hour had passed. Hannah had lost consciousness again, but her breathing was steadier, her color marginally better. She'll live, Sarah asked. If infection doesn't set in, and if... Mason paused, choosing his words carefully. The pregnancy survived, I think. But trauma like this, there's no guarantee. Sarah nodded, her face unreadable. She wants the baby to die. Wants to die herself. She thinks carrying his evil makes her evil. And what do you think? I think evil isn't born, it's chosen. Sarah met his eyes. Sullivan chose it. Pike chose it. Hannah is innocent. The child is innocent. But convincing her of that, she shook her head. That's a different kind of surgery. Mason cleaned his instruments, studying Sarah in his peripheral vision. She moved like a warrior, economy of motion, constant awareness of her surroundings, ready for violence at any moment. But there was something else there too, a deep weariness, the kind that came from carrying too much for too long. Why did Sullivan target your village, he asked. There are dozens of Apache settlements. Why yours? Sarah's mouth twisted. My father was a peace chief. Signed treaties, encouraged cooperation with white settlements. Sullivan saw that as weakness. Wanted to make an example, show that even friendly Apaches weren't safe. And there was another reason, which was profit. 23 women and girls taken from our village. Sullivan sells them. Did you know that brothels in Santa Fe, private collectors in Street Louis, sometimes across the border into Mexico? The military action is just cover. His real business is flesh. Mason had heard rumors of such things but had never seen proof. The army wasn't perfect. He knew that better than most. But systematic trafficking, that required protection, at multiple levels, bribes, forged orders, cooperative officials. He can't be doing this alone, Mason said. He's not. He has a network. Officers, civilians, even a federal marshal or two. Sarah's voice held bitter knowledge. That's why running to the law won't work. That's why I'm handling this myself. By yourself, you and a wounded pregnant girl against a military company. I've killed 5 of his men already. Sarah said it without boasting, simple fact. Pike was the 6th. I'll kill Sullivan too eventually. And then what? You'll be hunted for murder. They'll hang you. Better hanged than enslaved. Better dead than silent. Sarah turned to check on Hannah, adjusting the blanket. You don't understand what it's like watching your people disappear. Every village lives in fear. Every family counts their daughters at night. And the soldiers just keep coming, taking, destroying. Someone has to fight back. Mason understood better than she knew. 2 years ago, Lieutenant Sullivan, he was lieutenant, then ordered a raid on a village near Fort Bowie. Intelligence said renegade warriors were hiding there. I scouted ahead, found only women, children, elders. Reported back, said we should withdraw. Sullivan ordered the attack anyway. Sarah turned slowly. What did you do? Refused. Told my men to stand down. 3 obeyed. The rest followed Sullivan in. Mason's jaw clenched at the memory. 18 dead. All civilians. Sullivan blamed me, said my refusal caused confusion that led to unnecessary casualties. Court-martial was quick. Dishonorable discharge, no pension, blacklisted from any government position. And the village gone. Survivors scattered. Sullivan got a commendation for eliminating a renegade stronghold. The bitterness in Mason's voice surprised even himself. He thought he'd buried these feelings, but apparently they'd just been waiting. Sarah studied him with new intensity. You lost everything for refusing to kill innocents. I lost a career. You lost family, home, husband, child. Mason met her gaze. There's no comparison. There's more comparison than you think. Sarah moved to the window, peered out at the still falling snow. Tell me, Mason Reeves, when you refused Sullivan's order, was it because you're noble or because you're broken? The question struck deeper than Mason expected. What's the difference? Noble men act from principle. Broken men act from pain. Sarah's breath fogged the cold glass. I'm broken. I fight Sullivan not because it's right, but because I need him to hurt the way he hurt me. That's not justice. That's revenge. And you think revenge is wrong. I think it's not enough. Sarah turned back. Killing Sullivan satisfies my pain, but saves no one else. His network continues. His buyers find new suppliers. Nothing changes except I become the monster too. Mason absorbed this, recognizing the internal war she was fighting. He'd fought the same battle for 2 years, oscillating between righteous anger and self-destructive guilt. So what's the alternative? I don't know yet. Sarah returned to Hannah's bedside, touched her sister's forehead gently, but she's the reason I have to find one. She needs to see that surviving doesn't mean becoming what hurt you. That carrying someone else's sin doesn't make it yours. Outside, the wind shifted. Mason's trained ear caught the change in sound, not just weather, but something else. He moved to the window, extinguished the lamp, let his eyes adjust to darkness. What is it? Sarah asked, instantly alert. Riders? 2, maybe 3, coming from the south. Sarah's hand went to her knife. They found us. Mason grabbed his Winchester from above the door. How many men does Sullivan have in this region? His main company is 20 soldiers. But he splits them into hunting parties when tracking, usually 4 or 5 per group. Can you shoot? Sarah's look told him exactly what she thought of that question. I can shoot, but Hannah can't be moved and I won't leave her. Wasn't suggesting you should. Mason checked his ammunition, 12 rounds in the Winchester, 6 in the Colt. Not ideal odds if there were 5 riders, but he'd worked with worse. Can you use a rifle? I prefer the bow. Silent. Won't be much use for silence once they're at the door. Mason handed her his spare revolver anyway. 6 shots. Make them count. The riders materialized from the snow, like ghosts, 3 of them moving cautiously toward the cabin. They stopped about 50 yards out, clearly visible in the reflected light of snow despite the darkness. One dismounted, approached on foot. The knock was polite, almost friendly. Hello, the cabin. Looking for 2 Apache women, 1 pregnant. Seen anyone like that pass through? Mason. Recognized the tactic play. Friendly, assess the situation, then strike. He'd used it himself during his military days. Haven't seen anyone. He called back. Storm's too bad for traveling. Mind if I come in freezing out here? Rather you didn't. Recovering from fever. Don't want visitors. A pause. Then, thing is, friend, we tracked blood to your door. So either you've got what we're looking for, or you're hurt and need help. Either way, I'm coming in. Sarah positioned herself behind the door, knife ready. Mason stood to the side, rifle aimed at chest height. The door opened slowly, and the man entered, young, maybe 25, wearing cavalry insignia but no rank. A private probably, or a scout. His eyes went immediately to the bed where Hannah lay, then to Sarah, then to Mason's Winchester. Well, he said carefully. Seems you lied about not seeing anyone. Seems you lied about wanting to help, Mason replied. Who sent you, Sullivan? The young man's hand drifted toward his sidearm. Captain Sullivan wants his property back, the pregnant one especially. She's valuable. She's a person, not property. Army says different. She's a fugitive escaped from lawful custody. The scout's eyes never left the rifle. You're interfering with military operations, mister. That's a federal offense. So is human trafficking, Mason said. Unlawful imprisonment. Rape. Should I continue? The scout's face hardened. I don't know what stories these squaws told you, but he never finished the sentence. Sarah moved like water, stepped from behind the door, and drove her knife into the man's kidney with clinical precision. He gasped, hand still on his undrawn weapon, and collapsed. The other two will have heard him fall, Sarah said, calmly cleaning her blade on the dying man's coat. They'll come fast now. Mason was already moving to the window. The remaining two riders had dismounted, rifles drawn, advancing on the cabin from different angles. Smart tactics, difficult to cover both approaches simultaneously. Take the west window, Mason instructed. I'll cover the door. Don't kill unless you have to. Living prisoners can testify. Sarah gave him a skeptical look, but moved to the window, her bow now in hand. Mason watched her knock an arrow with fluid expertise, draw, and hold with steady arms. Whatever else she was, Sarah Brightknife was undeniably a warrior. The first man tried to breach through the west window rifle barrel first. Sarah's arrow took him through the hand, pinning it to the window frame. His scream split the night as he dropped his weapon. The second man, hearing his companion's distress, made the mistake of rushing the door. Mason shot him in the leg, deliberately non-lethal, and the man went down hard in the snow. Silence fell, broken only by the wounded men's groans and the whistle of wind through cracks in the cabin walls. Mason waited, counting heartbeats, ensuring no fourth or fifth rider would appear. When none did, he risked opening the door. The leg-shot man was crawling toward his horse, leaving a dark trail in the white snow. Mason grabbed him by the collar, dragged him back to the cabin. Sarah had already retrieved the man with the arrow through his hand, forcing him inside at knife point. Sit, Mason commanded, gesturing to the floor. And tell me everything about Sullivan's operation. The leg-shot man, older, maybe 30, with sergeant's stripes, spat blood. Go to hell. Sarah knelt beside him, her knife suddenly at his throat. My sister is lying in that bed because of what your captain does. My husband is dead. My child is dead. I have nothing left to lose, Sergeant, which makes me very, very dangerous to you. So I suggest cooperation. The sergeant's eyes went to Hannah, then back to Sarah's face. Whatever he saw there made him reconsider. What do you want to know? How many men does Sullivan have total? 20 in his company. But he's got connections, other officers, civilian contractors, buyers, maybe 50 people involved overall. Where does he hold the women before selling them? The sergeant hesitated. Sarah pressed the blade deeper, drawing a thin line of blood. Fort Marcy, old storage buildings on the east side. 15 women there now, maybe more. Mason exchanged glances with Sarah. Fort Marcy was a federal installation. Sullivan keeping prisoners there meant official complicity, possibly reaching the command level. Who knows about this? What rank Colonel Thompson knows? Maybe others above him. I don't know how high it goes. The sergeant's voice had gone hoarse with fear. Look, I just follow orders. I didn't sign up for this. But you participate, Sarah said coldly. Which makes you complicit. Which makes you guilty. Sarah Mason said quietly. We need them alive. Why? So they can testify, then get acquitted by a corrupt system. So justice can fail again. Sarah's hand trembled on the knife, and Mason realized she was close to breaking the careful control she'd maintained, finally cracking under the weight of accumulated trauma. Because if you kill them, you prove Sullivan right, Mason said. You become the savage he claims you are. You give him justification for everything he's done. Sarah's eyes met his, and he saw the war happening behind them, rage versus reason, vengeance versus principle. For a long moment, the cabin held its breath. Then Hannah spoke from the bed, her voice weak but clear. Sister, don't. Please. I've already been made into a victim by their violence. Don't let them make you into a monster with yours. The knife slowly withdrew from the sergeant's throat. Sarah walked to Hannah, knelt beside the bed. I'm sorry, little one. I'm so angry. I know. I'm angry too. Hannah's hand found Sarah's. But we have to be better. Have to prove we're more than what they tried to make us. Mason secured the two prisoners, binding them efficiently while they had this reprieve. Outside, the man Sarah had killed lay cooling in the snow. 3 men eliminated, 2 captured. That would buy them time, but not much. When these scouts didn't report back, Sullivan would send more, probably the full company. We can't stay here, Mason said. They know this location. More will come. Hannah can't travel yet, Sarah replied. The surgery was hours ago. Moving her could reopen the wound. Staying here guarantees capture or death. Hannah stirred. Leave me. Take the evidence these men can provide. Stop Sullivan from hurting others. No, Sarah said firmly. I'm already ruined, sister. Already broken. But you can still stop. Sarah's voice cracked with emotion. You are not ruined, not broken, not less than you were. You survived. That makes you stronger, not weaker. I'm carrying his evil inside me. You're carrying a child. A life. The circumstances of conception don't define the worth of that life, any more than the circumstances of your captivity define yours. Sarah gripped Hannah's hand. I lost my child, lost my husband, lost everything except you. So when I say you're not leaving, I say it with the authority of someone who knows what real loss looks like. You are my family, my blood, and I don't abandon family. Tears tracked down Hannah's face. I don't know how to live with this, neither do I. But we'll figure it out together. Sarah looked up at Mason. We need a plan that doesn't require leaving her. Mason thought quickly, assessing options. The cabin was defensible, but not indefinitely. Food and ammunition were limited. The nearest friendly settlement was Prescott, but that was 40 miles of open territory, where Sullivan's men could easily intercept them. There's a way, he said slowly, but it requires trust you probably don't have. Try me. My commanding officer before Sullivan, Colonel Marcus Webb. He was the one who tried to defend me at the court-martial, nearly got demoted himself for it. He's stationed at Fort Huachuca now, about 30 miles south. Sarah's expression hardened. You want us to go to a military fort, where we'll be arrested on sight. Webb is honest. If I can get word to him about Sullivan's operation, he'll investigate. He has the authority to arrest Sullivan, court-martial him properly. Your first commanding officer failed you, Sarah pointed out. Why trust another because Webb kept trying? Even after I was discharged. Sent letters pushed for reinvestigation. The army shut him down, but he didn't give up. Mason met her skeptical gaze. I know it's asking a lot, trusting military justice after what you've been through, but it's the only way to stop Sullivan permanently with legal authority that can't be questioned or overturned. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, clearly warring with herself. Finally, and if we go to this colonel, and he arrests us instead, sends Hannah back to Sullivan, then I'll break you out myself. And we'll go back to your original plan. Kill Sullivan and run. You'd do that, betray your own people. Mason looked at the captured soldiers, then at Hannah lying wounded and pregnant in his bed, then at Sarah with her warrior's eyes and survivor's scars. They're not my people anymore. Haven't been since I refused that order. You are, though. You and Hannah. Because you reminded me what I was fighting for in the first place. Protecting the innocent, standing against cruelty. Choosing conscience over convenience. Something shifted in Sarah's expression, a microscopic softening. You're either very brave or very foolish, Mason Reeves. Probably both. Hannah spoke up weakly. I trust him, sister. He had every reason to turn us away, but he didn't. Risked his safety for strangers. Sarah looked between them, clearly torn. Mason could see her calculating odds, weighing risks, trying to determine if this was wisdom or wishful thinking. Finally, she nodded. We go to your Colonel Webb, but on my terms. I keep my weapons. First sign of betrayal, I kill everyone necessary and get Hannah out. Fair enough. And Mason Sarah's hand found his forearm, the grip surprisingly gentle despite her calloused palms. Thank you. For seeing us as people, not problems. The touch lingered longer than necessary, and Mason felt something unexpected. A connection forming despite, or perhaps because of their shared brokenness. They were both warriors who'd lost battles that mattered. Both survivors of a system that punished conscience. both searching for a way to live with choices that couldn't be unmade. "We should leave before dawn," Mason said reluctantly, stepping back. "I'll rig a travois for Hannah, make it as comfortable as possible. The two prisoners come with us, evidence and leverage." They spent the remaining dark hours preparing. Sarah fashioned a travois from Mason's bed frame and canvas, padding it with blankets and furs. Mason sorted ammunition, packed food and water-prepared horses from the ones the dead scouts had ridden. The two captive soldiers watched silently, the sergeant's wounded leg roughly bandaged, both men clearly calculating their chances of escape and finding them poor. As false dawn began graying the eastern sky, they assembled outside. Hannah lay on the travois, pale but conscious, one hand protectively over her swollen belly. Sarah sat a horse with her bow slung across her back, rifle in the saddle scabbard, every inch the warrior. Mason led his own mount, and the horses carrying the prisoners, his Winchester across his pommel. 30 miles, he said. "If we push hard, we can make it by nightfall. And if Sullivan's men find us first?" Sarah asked. Mason checked his rifle one more time. "Then we see if you and I are enough to stop them." They rode south as the sun rose, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of gold and pink. Behind them, Mason's cabin sat quiet and empty, already feeling like it belonged to someone else's life. Ahead lay uncertain alliance with military authority, probable confrontation with Sullivan's forces, and the slim hope that justice might prevail. But as Mason glanced at Sarah riding beside him, her profile sharp against the morning light, he felt something he hadn't experienced in 2 years' purpose. Not the hollow obedience of military service, but genuine conviction that what he was doing mattered. These women mattered. Their survival mattered. Their justice mattered. And he would see it done whatever the cost. The first attack came at midday. They'd been following a game trail through pine forest, the going slow to protect Hannah from excessive jolting. Mason had been watching their back trail constantly, so he spotted the riders before they closed within rifle range, 4 men moving fast from the northeast. "Company," he said quietly. 4 riders maybe half a mile back. Sarah wheeled, her horse eyes narrowing as she assessed the threat. Sullivan's cavalry coats. Could be regular patrol, could be his men. "We can't assume friendly," Mason agreed. "There's an outcropping ahead, defensible position. We make our stand there." They moved quickly, reaching the rocky formation, a natural horseshoe of boulders and scrub pine that offered cover and high ground. Mason helped Hannah off the travois, positioning her behind the largest boulder where she'd be protected from crossfire. The 2 prisoners he bound securely to a pine tree, gagging them to prevent warning shouts. Sarah took position on the right flank, her bow ready, several arrows stuck point first in the ground for quick access. Mason covered the center. Winchester rested on a stable rock. They waited, heartbeats synchronizing with the approaching hoofbeats. The 4 riders slowed as they neared the outcropping, clearly sensing the ambush potential. The lead rider, a man Mason recognized with a cold shock, raised his hand, halting the group. Captain Richard Sullivan sat his horse with the easy arrogance of a man accustomed to power. He'd aged since Mason last saw him, face more lined hair, grayer at the temples, but the cruelty in his eyes remained unchanged. He surveyed the outcropping with a predator's patience. Mason Reeves Sullivan called out, "I heard you'd gone to ground out here like a wounded animal." "Fitting." Mason didn't respond, keeping his rifle trained on Sullivan's chest. "And Sarah Bright Knife, the woman who murdered 6 of my men." Sullivan's smile was cold. "You're both in significant trouble. But it doesn't have to end in blood. Release my soldiers, surrender the pregnant girl, and I'll only charge you with obstruction. Could be as little as 5 years in a territorial prison. Or we could charge you with human trafficking, rape, and murder," Mason replied. "Your own men have already testified to your operation, Sullivan." "It's over." Sullivan's expression didn't change, but his horse shifted, sensing its rider's tension. "Testimony from enemy combatants and a disgraced officer. That'll never hold in any court. Federal court might disagree, especially with Colonel Webb investigating." That landed. Sullivan's jaw tightened. "Webb has no authority over my operations. He does if those operations involve crimes against civilians." Mason's finger rested lightly on the trigger. "You crossed a line, Sullivan. Turned military raids into slaving operations. Enriched yourself with suffering. That's not war. That's evil." "I see you've gone native," Sullivan sneered. "Defending savages, betting one probably. You always were weak, Reeves. Too soft for the real work of civilization." Sarah's voice cut across the space, cold and precise. "My name is Sarah Bright Knife. I am the daughter of Chief Running Bear, who you murdered under a flag of truce. I am the widow of Kohana Two Knives, who you shot in the back. I am the sister of Hannah Bright Knife, who your Captain Pike raped until she wished for death. And I am the woman who will watch you hang. Big words from a squaw with a bow, Sullivan mocked. But Mason saw the calculation in his eyes, the reassessment of threat level. Sullivan was a bully, comfortable with victims but less so with opponents who fought back. I have a proposal, Sarah continued. Single combat, you and me. Your men and Mason stay out of it. Winner decides what happens next. Sullivan laughed. You think I'm stupid enough to fight hand-to-hand with an Apache warrior? We have rifles, girl. We have numbers. We have every advantage. You have fear, Sarah said. Fear that even if you kill us, the truth will spread. Fear that Webb will investigate. Fear that your network will crumble because you couldn't silence 2 women and 1 disgraced soldier. Mason saw the calculation shift in Sullivan's face, the recognition that Sarah was right. Killing them would create martyrs, invite scrutiny. But if he could discredit them, dismiss their claims as the ravings of unstable criminals. Here's my counter-proposal, Sullivan said. You surrender now peacefully. I ensure the pregnant girl gets proper medical care. We sort this out through official channels, proper investigations. Maybe some good comes from it, reforms oversight, but it has to be done lawfully. It was a lie, and everyone present knew it, but it was a dangerous lie, the kind that might sound reasonable to anyone who learned of the standoff later. Sullivan was already constructing his defense, his narrative. Sarah, Mason said quietly. He's not going to let any of us leave here alive. This is a delaying tactic while he positions his men. As if confirming Mason's words, Mason caught movement in his peripheral vision. One of Sullivan's men had dismounted, was working his way up the right flank through the trees, trying to get behind Sarah's position. Contact right, Mason called, and Sarah spun, her bow already drawn. She loosed, and Mason heard a grunt followed by the crash of a body through brush. The 3 mounted men immediately spurred forward, rifles coming up the negotiation facade, abandoned. Mason fired, worked. The lever fired again. His first shot took down a horse. He never liked shooting animals, but stopping the charge was priority. The rider pitched forward, rolled, came up firing. Mason's second shot caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around. Sarah's arrows flew with mechanical precision. Her second shot took the next rider through the thigh, deep enough to scrape bone. He screamed, dropping his rifle. The 4th man, seeing his companions fall, wheeled his horse and retreated clearly, deciding this fight wasn't worth dying for. That left Sullivan. The captain had dismounted during the chaos, taken cover behind a fallen log. He had a clear shot at the boulder, sheltering Hannah, and from the angle of his rifle he knew it. Reeves, he called. Bright knife. Final offer. Walk away now, leave the girl, and I let you live. Refuse and I put a bullet through her pregnant belly. Mason's blood went cold. Beside him, Sarah had gone absolutely still, her bow halfway drawn, every muscle locked in terrible anticipation. You won't, Mason said, praying he was right. She's valuable merchandise, you said so yourself. She's a liability now. Damaged goods. Better to eliminate the evidence. Sullivan's voice carried sociopathic certainty. I'm going to count to 3. 1. Mason's mind raced through options, scenarios, desperate gambits. He couldn't get a clear shot at Sullivan from his position. Sarah couldn't either without exposing herself to Sullivan's rifle. They were in stalemate, and Sullivan held the hostage. 2. Hannah's voice drifted from behind the boulder, surprisingly calm. Sister, it's all right. Let him shoot. No, Sarah whispered, anguish cracking through her warrior's composure. I'm tired, sister. So tired. And this way, at least, it ends quick. Clean. Hannah's voice grew fainter. Tell my child, if it lives, that I was more than what they made me. Tell it I chose this, chose to end the cycle. 3. Mason threw himself forward, a desperate attempt to draw Sullivan's fire. But Sullivan was already squeezing the trigger, his rifle aimed with professional certainty at the boulder sheltering Hannah. The shot rang out. But it didn't come from Sullivan's rifle. The captain jerked, stumbled, looked down at the red blossom, spreading across his chest. He tried to raise his weapon, failed, fell to his knees. Behind him, emerging from the tree line with a smoking revolver, was the prisoner sergeant, the one Mason had bound to the tree. The man had somehow worked free, retrieved his sidearm, and made a choice. Sullivan pitched forward into the snow, twitched, once lay still. Mason approached cautiously, kicked Sullivan's rifle away, checked for pulse. Nothing. The captain was dead, killed by one of his own men. Why, Sarah asked the sergeant, her bow still drawn, still ready to kill, if this was some kind of trick. The sergeant lowered his revolver, let it fall from his hand. Because he was going to shoot a pregnant woman. Because I got daughters back home. Because... He sagged against the tree, exhaustion and blood loss catching up. Because this was never supposed to be what we were. We're supposed to be soldiers, not murderers. Mason checked the other fallen men. The one Sarah had shot in the flank would survive, probably. The one Mason had hit in the shoulder was dead, unlucky placement, had hit an artery. The man who'd fled was long gone, likely running straight back to whatever force Sullivan had left behind. "We need to move," Mason said. "That runner will bring more men." Hannah Sarah rushed to her sister. The younger woman was conscious, but her wound had reopened from the stress and movement. Blood seeped through the bandages. "I'm all right," she said weakly. The baby's still moving, but she wasn't all right. Mason could see that. The surgery site was inflamed, possibly infected, despite their precautions. Hannah needed real medical care soon, or she'd die regardless of Sullivan's bullet. "Fort Huachuca is 8 miles, Mason said. "If we ride hard, she can't ride hard." Sarah interrupted. "The bouncing would kill her, or the baby." "Then I go ahead, bring back a medical wagon." Mason was already moving to his horse. "You stay here, keep her stable. The sergeant can testify to what happened, corroborate our story." Sarah caught his arm. "If you ride into a federal fort and tell them a story about a rogue captain, they'll arrest you before listening. You need leverage. You need me. I need you alive more." Their eyes locked, and Mason realized with sudden clarity that what he felt wasn't just solidarity or shared purpose. Somewhere between the surgery and the standoff, between her confession of brokenness and his admission of failure, something deeper had formed. Recognition, perhaps. Not love too soon, too complicated for that, but the foundation of it, the acknowledgement of someone who understood, who'd walked a parallel path through loss and found their way to still standing. "Go together or don't go at all," Sarah said firmly. "That's how we survive this." "Together," Hannah's weak voice interrupted. "Take me. I'll die here anyway. At least at the fort I have a chance." They left Sullivan's body cooling in the mountain snow and rode hard for Fort Huachuca. Hannah drifted between consciousness and darkness, each breath a small victory. Mason prayed for the first time in 2 years, prayed this girl and her innocent child would survive. The fort appeared at sunset. Sarah tensed hand near her knife, but the guards saw Hannah's condition and sent immediately for Colonel Webb. The old officer took one look at Mason, then at the dying girl, and barked orders: medical wagon. Dr. Chen. Now, while surgeons fought to save Hannah, Mason and Sarah told their story. The sergeant corroborated everything: Sullivan's trafficking network, the 15 women imprisoned at Fort Marcy, the officers involved. Webb listened with the intensity of a man witnessing something that would define his conscience. "You understand what you're alleging?" Webb finally said. "This investigation will be brutal. Every aspect of your lives examined, weaponized. Will you do it?" Mason asked. Webb met his eyes. "I should have done it 2 years ago. But this ends now. Tonight we raid Fort Marcy. Every woman Sullivan imprisoned will be freed." They waited through the night. Near dawn, Dr. Chen emerged. "She'll live. The pregnancy is stable." Sarah's knees buckled. Mason caught her as relief flooded through her warrior's body. Hannah looked small in the hospital bed, but her eyes were finally clear. "I'm still alive," she said wonderingly. "We're still alive." "We are," Sarah whispered. "Sullivan's dead. His network is finished. The baby's still healthy. Still growing." Hannah closed her eyes, tears sliding free. "I thought I wanted to die, but now I think I want to live. Want to prove terrible beginnings don't have to mean terrible endings. They don't," Sarah promised. "We'll prove it together." 3 months later, a baby girl was born in the house Mason built near the fort. Hannah named her Kohana after Sarah's husband, after bravery and love. Sarah stayed helping raise her niece, while testifying at trials that freed 38 women and convicted Sullivan's entire network. Mason became a civilian scout, building bridges instead of burning them. One evening, Sarah and Mason sat watching the sunset while Hannah sang lullabies inside. "Planning to stay?" Sarah asked. "If I'm welcome." She took his hand, calloused palm against calloused palm. "You're welcome, Mason Reeves. More than welcome. I don't know what we're building here. If it's love or just shared survival. Does it matter? We've both been broken, both lost everything. Maybe that makes us exactly right to build something new." Inside, baby Kohana cried, and Hannah's voice rose in an old Apache lullaby, a promise that despite the darkness, life continued. "Together then," Mason said. Together. Some Wild West love stories aren't written in grand gestures, they're built in silence, blood, and the choice to protect innocence. This is one of those cowboy love stories the territory would rather forget. Because Wild West stories aren't always about gunslingers and gold. Sometimes they're about broken people choosing mercy over vengeance, proving that even the darkest beginnings can grow into light.